from the Bank of Zimbabwe to remit Bitcoin to cash and saving people who really needed it a lot of fees and money. You can see he's also the co-founder of I Love Black People.
I thought you were going to say, you can tell he loves black people, but yeah.
And I do too.
Show you right.
Okay, next we have Leela Nieves Lee, and this is her room.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
She's a staff director for Senate Banking Committee ranking member Tim Scott. Prior to that, she was a senior director at Visa, and also she's been in and out of government. She was a political appointee, director of congressional relations at USTR. So thanks, good to see you. Next, we have Tyler Williams. He is the head of regulatory and legislative affairs at Gallup.
All right. Thank you, Tyler.
He's also spent a lot of time in public service. He was a senior advisor to Governor Glenn Youngkin's campaign. He's worked at Treasury and on the Hill. And of note also, just as we're in this room, he was the banking counsel for Senator Tillis. So welcome. Next, Mary Elizabeth Taylor, who is the head of government and external affairs at Robinhood.
All right.
You get to start.
She's also spent about a decade in government, right? As she was confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. She worked in Leg Affairs at the White House, and she's helped shepherd through a few nominations of people we might know, including Jay Powell and Justice Gorsuch. And of course, also in the Senate, you were worked in Leader McConnell's floor operation.
I did.
So good to see you. Next, we have Mark Young. He's the Chief Risk and Security Officer of Consensus. The company is a leading Ethereum block software firm. Good to see you, Mark. Mark is a specialist and an authority on national security and intelligence. He's also an entrepreneur. He's led 2 successful startups in the cybersecurity area. And he served in government roles as well, including at U.S. Cyber Command. And he was special counsel pretty close by on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
All right.
Last but not least, we have Jaron Smith. Jaron is a partner at CGCN. He worked in the Trump administration in a variety of roles, including as Deputy Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy. And he was also the Deputy Director of the White House Office of American Innovation. And he's an author, and I encourage you to read Jaron's book. So,
All right.
So yeah, let's start off. I think, Jaron, Sinclair, you're the man of the hour. Tell us a little bit about the summit, what you're trying to accomplish here. Any interesting stuff coming up this week as it gets rolling?
Yes, thank you, and I really appreciate and definitely appreciate the article. I had to reach out and kind of verify some things because this is my fellow 1969 brother. So we both were Gen Xers. So when we were kind of doing the article, I think some of the things we discussed kind of conjured up why we do what we do right now with the Black Blockchain Summit. We came of age in a period of time that was kind of pre all this digital first stuff and the internet. And in many ways, those innovations passed over many black communities. And it wasn't until much later in life we had to try to catch up with this technology. So when it came, that was like 1987 coming of age. I'm dating myself, but we double nickel guys. With that being said, we wanted to make sure the next generations and generations that come after us have access to this blockchain information and blockchain understanding. So we really kicked this all off to make sure that as many of our black communities will be able to receive this information. And we start off back in 2017 with a historic, we called it a transatlantic bus tour for Bitcoin, where we went through all these universities in the States, historically black colleges, for their homecomings. And then we were doing the same thing over in Zimbabwe with their universities. And it was quite costly trying to move around with a bus. So we said, next year, let's try to do a summit. We have everybody kind of come to us and we can kind of talk and bring together some of the best and brightest minds to talk about the issues that are facing our communities and how we can leverage this incredible technology. So as a fundamental premise of how we approach this, even though it's a Black Blockchain Summit, we have brothers and sisters from all walks of life, from all the communities that God has made. But our focus is explicitly on issues that are facing the Black communities. And I say Black communities because our communities aren't monolithic. You know, there's lots of things we have in common, but there's different ways to view certain issues throughout our diaspora. So we literally have people like myself, who's an engineer, we call applied scientists. So we have computer engineers, we have electrical engineers, we have folks that are developers, and then on many of our panels, we also have people who are social science majors or social science backgrounds, sociologists, political scientists, and ways that we can actually take a real analysis of the problems in our community, as well as with some real, hyper scalable solutions that come through the blockchain technology and other areas. And we put those folks together to kind of have a grasp, because sometimes you get these folks in the tech space that think they understand problems, and they really don't. And then you got folks who've been looking at the same problems for like decades, and they really don't understand some of the new ways to approach it. And we think blockchain has given us an opportunity in ways that we couldn't have done before to kind of pull together these communities to do so.
And this is the 7th year.
Oh, this 7, yeah. We're running it back 7 times. Yeah. Lucky, look, that's a completion. We know what 7 means. So but it wouldn't happen without wonderful folks that have been here, so often. We would go to my first conference was back in. I think it was the Bitcoin Foundation had an event in the Netherlands. And as I look across this room, at that conference, we had about 250 people, maybe about 10 of them were Black, and out of that, probably 7 was serving coffee. And I was looking around for the coffee. We had no coffee here. We definitely had open bar. I'll take that. That's progression. And then at the same time, we had more brothers and sisters here talking about these complex technologies in a way that's meaningful.
I'm going to cut you off right there because we're not.
Obviously.
It's all right. We had a long interview. Just a funny story. And I think first 45 minutes was Sinclair talking, and then he says, "Okay, well, when's the interview?"
I was like, what?
So I want to go to Jerron, because you're working with Jerron now. You talked about kind of the difference between engineers and tech people and people not being in the same place. Jerron is here to help you with policy, and there's a need for people to get involved in crypto policy. So Jerron, tell us a little bit about what you're doing for the Black Blockchain Association. What do you want to accomplish?
Sure. So this is about my 3rd year working with Sinclair with educating members of Congress so they can hear new voices. Many times when we talk about these issues, you just have some of the companies in the room and you don't hear some of the people that are on the ground creating new innovations and doing things globally. And, me and Sinclair have been friends for a good amount of time. And when I was able to kind of reconnect with him after I left the White House, I told him my passion for trying to empower underserved communities. He's kind of always known that about me. I have a tax and banking background, so it's always been my hope to figure out ways that we can democratize capital. And blockchain technology has the ability to do that. And so when we started talking about it, he was just like, let's do some work together. And he stayed on top of me. He was like, you need to come up to the conference and speak. People need to kind of hear your voice. And one day, or just like, well, have you ever thought about kind of getting members more involved? And he was like, yeah, I would love to do that. Let's figure out how we can make that happen. And about 3 years ago, we were able to kind of get members like, Cory Booker and Byron Donald, about 6 members to come up to Howard University. But the hope was it's harder to get members, especially during session off campus too far. And so our hope was to kind of start building infrastructure up here and having those conversations here on the ground, not only with the staffers, not only with the members, but actually the staffers. Being a former staffer, that's where the real work gets done a lot of the time, and being able to educate them is extremely important. And I got blessed with the opportunity to kind of work at CGCN, which basically has gotten behind this whole concept of kind of giving voice to communities that don't normally get it, and kind of reapproaching advocacy in a way that's going to kind of lift up all Americans. And no issue needs needs to kind of get lifted up more at the margins than the issue around blockchain. And so that's what we're doing.
Good. Tyler, Galaxy, you guys have been a partner with the summit for a long time. Talk to us about your interest in working with the summit and what can kind of groups like the summit do to drive policy change?
Sure. So I guess our general philosophy at Galaxy is if you're not telling your story, someone else is telling it for you, and that's going to be a problem on the Hill. So our CEO, Mike Novogratz, and I, we were thinking about what we could do to leverage sort of the decentralized nature of the blockchain crypto industry writ large, and what we could do to engage with local constituencies to really bring like a grassroots level conversation to advocacy. And what we started was we partnered with the mayors in Miami a couple years ago to do some grassroots education with mayors at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And then Jaron and I have been friends for a long time, so he gave me a call and he said, what do you think about building a policy summit with the Black Blockchain Summit at Howard? So that was 3 years ago. We embarked on this endeavor of working with Sinclair, which has been an interesting excursion to say the least. And we started doing some direct engagement with them and educating and working with the students at Howard, which if you guys have not been to the summit on the weekend, I would encourage you to do so because they have a hackathon. It's a pretty unique special event. So that was how we got here and what we're doing and what we'll continue to do.
Good. Mark, if you think about this stuff from a high level, what does Washington need to do here and you know, to understand crypto and kind of how do you get your message out?
Nothing like a simple question to start things off. So if I could, let me just take a minute to answer that and say, I think in order to answer it, policymakers, regulators, they need to understand the context within which they are making these policy choices. And Rob, you would know better than most what the ebbs and flows are of financial regulation, but I'm going to also, for those who aren't familiar with it, I'm going to introduce a different humanity kind of ebb and flow with cycles introduced in a book called The Fourth Turning. So with financial regulation, we see that back and forth between a crisis and opportunity. So we see that after the Depression, we see Glass-Steagall, we see moving to a much more tighter regulatory regime. Then in the 70s to the 90s, we see a lot more open seizing of opportunity. We're off the gold standard. We eliminate the limitations on interest rate payments. So these things come and go. But what's been going on throughout all of those cycles, and then of course we had the 2008 crisis where we're back to different, tighter regulation, and more of a locking down, but even now we see that loosening up even more. But what's happened all along the way? Technology. So the introduction of credit cards in the 1950s and the introduction of ATM machines in the late 60s. We see electronic equities trading. We see algorithmic trading. We see the introduction of blockchain and digital wallets, DeFi, for example. So that's the ebb and flow where regulators should understand that cycle, and they should understand that this technology is going to march on. So you can either get on board or be run over by it. And then just if you're interested, there's a wonderful text called The Fourth Turning, where they talk about humanitarian cycles that we, as members of society, go through 4 essential turnings. We happen to be in the 4th turning right now, which is crisis, which is marked by technological innovation, and it's also marked by societal strife. But don't worry, it will only last until about 2035, in which case we'll be into the new turning, the 1st turning, which is a much more open and unified era. So if you understand those cycles, then you should be able to see the value of blockchain and decentralized protocols. What do I wish policymakers knew? That this is more than about financialization. The capabilities with these decentralized protocols go far beyond cryptocurrency. So sure, I mean, that's part of it, and we should get into it, and we should have smart regulation. But what I want of them is to do like 3 things. Bring an informed of the public interest to the policy choices. I don't mean informed I think that most policymakers and regulators in this building and across the street, I think they do have the public interest at heart, but they're not informed of the public interest of this technology. We've all talked about that. You have to know what it does. You know, have to know how it does it and what the potential of it is. So that's one. Two, bring an open mind. We used to say that minds are like parachutes. They only function when open. So bring an open mind and bring your questions, bring the hard questions. We as Consensus, we welcome those hard questions. Does decentralized protocols, do they solve all problems? No, but they solve a significant amount of problems that people aren't aware of. And finally, have some courage. Have some courage to admit some ignorance, to ask for help, and to engage with industry on some of these choices.
So speaking of courage, Mary Elizabeth, I want to ask you because Robinhood has kind of been in the forefront of pushing for regulatory clarity in the state. And your chief legal officer, I think yesterday, testified across the street about this in the House. Talk a little bit about what Robinhood sees as regulatory clarity. What needs to be done here, and kind of what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who just came in, I'm Mary Elizabeth. I'm with Robinhood. I lead our government affairs team. And so I think when talking about anything with Robinhood, at the center of everything we do is our mission. And our mission is super simple, super clear, but really ambitious, in that we are always in pursuit of democratizing finance for all. And so in order to achieve that, innovation is really what drives us every day in everything we do. Every product we ship, everything we do is really rooted also in innovation, and regulatory clarity is absolutely necessary for that to run. You know, I think at Robinhood, we're definitely encouraged by the House passage of FIT 21. And looking forward to seeing what might happen with that in the future. But I think, you know, if you look at other regions, if you look at the EU, they have very clear crypto regulatory, a very clear crypto regulatory landscape with MiCA. And I mean, we've launched our crypto product in the EU, and having that regulatory clarity is a very helpful thing. Here in the US, I'm sure that members on both sides of the aisle would agree that it would be wonderful to have that sort of clarity and opportunity and platform for crypto to thrive here as well.
And Leila, you're the reality check here, you know?
I had a suspicion I was being saved for last for a reason. There was a bit of a theme here in all the preceding questions.
But exactly, and I mean, part of the problem with the regulatory landscape right now is you have two agencies that are kind of trying to fight it out, and Congress unable to do it. And so I just wanted to see the kind of, you know, what's the perspective from the Hill? You can talk a little bit, do you think a bill will pass in the Senate? Do you think we could get FIT 21 done anytime soon? But also kind of, you know, how does Senator Scott see this issue? And, you know, there's an election coming up. You could be in a position to really drive this maybe next year. So.
Well, thank you for the question. I had a sneaking suspicion where this might have been going. But no, we're very excited to be here. And I'll maybe start off by saying you won't hurt my feelings if you go get a refill during my comments. I will endeavor to not bore anyone. And my comments will reflect my own opinions. But, you know, I think this event is an excellent example of the vigor around this conversation. I can't remember the last time we had something like this on the Senate side of this sort of substance and integration, right, with the committee that oversees a major portion of this conversation, of that regulatory and legal landscape. I think as I listen to my fellow panelists, that sort of, we've talked a lot about legislation being stalled, is the Senate going to consider something? I think the conversation should really be around the Senate is very engaged on these issues. We have multiple legislative proposals that are out there. You have new players in terms of members who are coming. My boss, Ranking Member Scott, is really excited about the possibility that the blockchain, that these sort of digital assets can provide to the conversation, to financial inclusivity. How do we increase access to credit? How do we uplift communities, to your point, Sinclair? How do we provide people the tools? And digital assets really provide a lot of that, and the blockchain enables so much of that, right? I think that that integration of those two items I was just talking with one of my colleagues, and we were talking about some of the different applications on the blockchain of how you meet consumers where they are, not where you want them to be. That's how you uplift people. And so I think this conversation is a really great one, and I feel very lucky to work with wonderful people on our team. Huge shout out to Graham Conlon. He does much of the digital asset work on our banking team. But when we talk about what the landscape looks like, I think Senator Scott has been very open about wanting a conversation. He came into his ranking membership and into his role as the Republican leader on the banking committee wanting to make the committee work again, to make the legislative process work again. And we've done that on everything from national security related legislation to stopping the flow of fentanyl through sanctioning cartels to looking at how do we look at the post-SVB collapse world, to his very, I think, recent and very, I think, positive comments about if he is chairman next year, exploring, should we have a digital asset subcommittee? What would that look like? Because that's how you end up spurring a conversation here in the Senate. So I don't know if we will get to a bill in this lame duck. Last I checked, the list is pretty hefty of all the items that need to get done before the end of the year. And last I checked, we still also need to fund the government. But I do think that, unfortunately, you have members of the Senate who have are starting to get more and more engaged, who are leaning forward on these issues in a way that, frankly, they weren't a year ago. I think the Senate posture a year ago was very different than what we see now, and I think that bodes well for the future.
Sinclair, why don't you talk a little bit about, and I want you guys now to jump in, I'm kind of done my questions, so we can just have a chat, but talk about what Senator Scott's been saying about the access to credit, access to the banking system, kind of the positives of blockchain, and particularly on people in diverse communities.
Well, I think, one of the things we talk about in engineering, is first principles and getting back to like the beginning of stuff. And if we really look at Barclays, Bank of America, how they were able to get their wealth, it wasn't through the Industrial Revolution. It literally was through enslavement of people, the stealing of land, like the things that these large banks got to be so powerful with were actually crimes against humanity now. You can't do that. So now, how do you get into a position if you might have been the one that was being traded at that point on Wall Street as chattel slavery? How do you give your community access to something that we can't go back and change? And I'm clear, no one in this room had participated in, did anybody participate in that in here? Was anybody that made it this far and they said, I want to know you, I got something to say, but none of us were there back then. So the fact that we weren't there, it is what it is. How do we make today, as we move forward, better? And I think in many ways, these technology give opportunities to communities that we couldn't have been able to afford. And I think one of the things that's important is that, we talk about sandboxes in our interview, but giving, small, startups an opportunity to participate in a way that allows them to create these financial digital solutions that really can be innovative. And as I see some of the changes being made, I think early on in the crypto space, let me just give you our journey. My co-founder, Mr. Christopher Mapendera, is here, so shout out and humbly. We thought we could build something better than Western Union and MoneyGram. We didn't even know back in 2013, 14, 15 that it was going to be, Bitcoin was going to be worth $63,000 last time I checked. And I feel very good about that, just to say out loud. But we didn't know that it was going to be worth that. So we really thought it was going to be the rails. Like, we really thought that if you could just be able to send money without an intermediary in between the two parties, that this would be amazing. And we would make more money than MoneyGram or Western Union because we could do it faster, better, and literally give the banks as well as the customer better value. With that being said, what happened, like now we fast forward, many of the regulatory regimes that are being created, you have to be a bank to actually maintain that, whatever the compliance that's required. So now that innovation that we really thought was going to be super amazing, in many ways might get back in the hands of Barclays and Western Union instead of in the vital hands of the folks that, they say, and this is going back to engineering, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, if you really are in a situation that's super dire, desperation is probably the father. So in many ways, people of historically oppressed communities actually know better solutions. When I was in Kenya, co-founder of Black Blockchain Summit, John Karanja is from Kenya, they had BitPesa and they had M-Pesa, where they actually used their phones to send money. Now, people would say, well, you know, the United States is so sophisticated, that's why we don't use our phones. But the truth is, Bank of America is not going to let Verizon control the financial reserves. It has nothing to do about being too sophisticated. These legacy banking systems have invested like probably trillions in making sure that they have, you know, these plastic cards with this little, that's a cassette strip. If y'all saw that little brown thing, that's like, we don't even use cassettes, right? But if you swiping, you going back to the 40s.
So how do we get to the future? Anybody have any thoughts about solutions here and what things should look like?
I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the power of inclusion in financial markets, especially what the blockchain and what crypto and digital assets can provide. I think you can't really have a conversation about inclusion without including education in that conversation as well. And I think to your earlier point, like meeting consumers, customers, investors where they are. You know, something that we champion at Robinhood is making sure that education is at the forefront of everything we do, whether it's in our app or it's outside of our app. So ensuring that that investors and individuals who want to get involved in crypto are also welcomed into the market and welcomed with the tools that they need. One of those tools being education is something that I think cannot go overlooked and is critical.
I'll take a slightly different and more aggressive approach. What I would say is I don't blame Congress at all for not acting. It's been quite confusing, and there's been different constituencies selling sort of different ideas to policymakers. And as Sinclair was mentioning, we live in a credit-based economy in the United States where the banks do have a lot of control over startups and founders and the types of credit access that those borrowers can get access to. And I think if we recognize anything from 2023, what you'll notice is a very small subfraction of the banking system banks crypto. And like that has to change for founders and entrepreneurs to be able to be successful in the United States. You can't start a business without a TIN and without a bank account. So if we know that's the starting place, that has to change. So I would say to this community, you can get engaged and you can complain to your banks and you can complain to your members of Congress to hold oversight over the bank regulators to change the posture. Because we shouldn't say that something's risky just because it doesn't fit the mold of what a traditional auto loan is. That's not fair to you guys, it's not fair to any startup, and it's why we've seen the more interesting projects. And from Galaxy, we have a venture team, we invest in interesting projects all over the world. I would say, this is pretty subjective, but the more interesting projects are being developed ex-US because it's the place that activity can happen in a safe zone. So I would say to you guys, don't blame Congress, but blame the regulators and get them to be more receptive. And one good way to do that is through aggressive oversight.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's why, kind of going back to my earlier point, it's an inside and outside game. While we're having this conversation here in the halls of Congress in the Senate Banking Committee, it's also important to Mary Elizabeth's point that we're on the ground talking to communities and helping them educate and empowering them with what's the promise of kind of opening up this technology, what it can do for communities. Because whether you're in places like, rural parts of South Dakota, or Appalachia, or New York City, Chicago, or Mississippi Delta, it's creating an economy that works for all people. And I think this is important to have this conversation here, but it's even more important to kind of educate those types of communities. And that's something that I actually started working on with Robinhood and plan to kind of work on with Sinclair, because Sinclair had the right vision in mind when you were taking that bus around, because you were actually touching people in each community. And it's going to take playing on both sides to kind of land this the right way.
So is the SEC the problem here? I don't want to name any names. Several of you guys have had some issues with the SEC or potential issues or pending clashes or whatever you want to call it. It is that the big problem? Is it the bank regulators? Is it the whole system?
Well, I'd like to pivot on something that Sinclair started to say, and then I'll get to that. How many people here are familiar with the concept of your social graph? Okay, a few. So imagine, Sinclair, this goes to what you were saying about it's not exactly empowering people with money, but it's an adjacent thing and it can lead to money. So your social graph, imagine all of the electronic connections that you have with institutions and other people. And you know who gets paid for that billion-dollar source of information? Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix. What if you could own that data, those data? You get paid for that. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to give up those data. It means you get to choose whether or not you do. And to your point, what if you could put that money in your pocket? So I had a conversation with a congressman about his district, and we were going back and forth about home ownership in his district in New York and average, like the median income. And I just thought, wow, what if these people could take that number happened to be about $46,650. And then what is the value of your social graph? If we could monetize that for these people, I said, I guarantee you could add 10K to that median income for those people. And that doesn't mean that these companies can't have the data. It just means that now that some of that money that they're putting on their bottom line goes into your pocket. Now, to your SEC point, I was having a conversation with a former CFTC chair, and he said, I was talking about all the same things that we've been talking about, innovation and revolutions in technology and all the promise that they hold. And he's like, oh, whoa, Mark. As a regulator, I am not an innovator. In fact, that scares me. I don't want that because that's destabilizing, that's inconsistent, that's too much of a variable for me to incorporate. Now, it will happen. Crisis usually drives it. It will happen, but don't make me accept innovation because that's destabilizing and that's not my job. So we have to meet regulators where they are. I think we have to meet legislators where they are too, to say, hey, look, we think that this is like a leap in advancement for your constituents, for all of the regulated bodies, but we have to understand that that's not where their head is at. We have to show, we have to pilot, we have to do sandboxes, we have to bring them along and show them the value and help them get comfortable with the risk that it presents.
I might follow Tyler's approach here and take a little bit more of an aggressive approach. I think meeting the regulator where they are, we tried to do that at Robinhood, right? Like we went into the SEC and tried to register, and we had over a dozen meetings, I believe, and were turned down eventually. My boss, Dan Gallagher, our chief legal officer at Robinhood, just testified on the House side yesterday to this effect, right? Like we at Robinhood, we lead our Robinhood crypto platform with safety first, and we are really proud of that. And safety first, of course, means working with the regulator and working with government to ensure that we are acting compliance with everything that we do. So we've tried to meet the regulator where they are, and that just hasn't really worked for us, unfortunately.
So now what?
We'll see in November, huh?
Somebody made the point about oversight, and legally, the banking committee has done a heavy job of oversight of the SEC. Do you think it works?
Absolutely. I will kind of pull a couple of threads together here, but my boss has made it very clear that he shares a lot of this frustration with the SEC, and unfortunately with all of our regulators. Conveniently, Chairman Gensler will be before this committee in this very room next week on Wednesday, and I think that'll be a great opportunity for members to continue to push. I know there's a lot of great examples that people have talked about just in this panel that I think will be really informative to looking at how we engage with that oversight. But oversight is a critical function. If our regulators do not know that Congress is watching them, that we are holding them accountable, in this particular regulatory environment where we see our regulators whether it's the SEC, the CFPB, the FDIC, stretching past their mandates, finding different ways to meddle in different areas to stifle innovation. I mean, that is so contrary to Senator Scott's ethos. His entire perspective is, how do we enable innovation here in the United States that helps uplift people? How do we give people the tools? And as you rightly point out, Mary Elizabeth, it's not just giving people tools. If you hand someone a toolbox and they have no idea what to do with it, it doesn't matter what's inside of that box. You have to provide financial literacy, education. You have to show people what the enablement capability is. And so to that effect, I absolutely agree. When we have these conversations with stakeholders, when industry informs us of some of the hurdles that they're facing, that helps provide more credence to our oversight. It helps us take concrete examples back to our regulators. It helps us push. I mean, Senator Scott was very active on pushing the SEC for oversight and accountability and partnering with the House side and with their subpoena authority and with a lot of the majority's power over there. Obviously, we were in the minority over here in order to push on things like the SEC climate disclosure rule. Gensler has made it very clear that he has a bullseye on this industry, and we plan to hold him accountable to that.
One way, you want to say something, or you want to?
I just want to add on the SEC. Like, one of the things, though, just looking at it from our industry, when we came out with ICOs, I mean, it was like probably dumb. Like, if you say ICO, that rhymes with IPO. Did you know that? And that just sounds like you're like asking someone to come over here and like check in on what you're doing. Like, again, I'm going to take it back to engineering. All this is data. Like, if anybody ever gets weird with you about Bitcoin, what is this? It's literally like, remember the old days we used to take pictures and go to CVS to get it developed, and then you got your phone, and you got your camera phone, and now you take pictures, and that picture looks like a picture, but it's really just data. It's not encrypted. You can be careful what you take a picture of, right? Because you could get it copied. But when literally Satoshi, what she was able to do was literally make sure that you could not counterfeit it. You couldn't copy it. And it was decentralized. It wasn't Microsoft in charge. It was all of us in charge, which was kind of neat. And it was open source, so you could be clear about it. What happened, I think, many of the folks in the tech space, we didn't understand these relationships, and some of us probably wanted to be like the big boys. So we called stuff fancy stuff that we thought was going to be great, but then it comes back when the ICO, initial coin offering, rhymes with IPO, and now we're all catching heck with SEC. When literally, you know, I didn't understand it with the Howey, what was the Howey test? All these weird things, but we had asked them to come. It's literally this data. Like, if you really stayed in a real techie space, we just could have called it plums and raspberries. We did not have, I mean, think about this, there's a thing called a Raspberry Pi. Like, Raspberry Pi sounds non-threatening, but you can do a lot of things with a Raspberry Pi that's very problematic.
I think a lawyer would still see through that, I have to tell you, but I don't know.
But what I'm trying to say is encrypted data is encrypted data. When you start saying that this is another thing, you're really wrapping it up in some, you're asking someone to come over and like look into it in another way. And I'm not saying to obfuscate, but if we really just called the things what they actually are, it probably would have created a different environment. And I'm just saying, in the crypto space, even how we dealt with hackers, I got hacked for maybe like 50 Bitcoins back in 2018. There was a real big culture. I remember, and this was what they had to call SIM swaps, where they would actually steal your phone number with SIM swaps. And in the industry, it was like one of those things where, well, hackers are somehow like these cool guys. Now, I promise you, you steal from me, like, I wish I could, I'm concealing carry. Like, come in my house. I wish you would. So my point is, we would glorify criminal behavior and call them hackers. No, you're a no good thief. All right, and we do certain things with y'all. So my point is, I think some things as an industry, I wish we had taken a different route so that people who didn't understand our technology could relate to us, because we were really technologists. At the end of the day, of course, people in the financial sector are very involved, but the people who actually drive the creation are actually coders in C++, and there's a code base, and you're building, and it all gets kind of weirded out when you start calling it other things, and now we're trying to fight something. I think 10 years ago almost, we didn't know it was going to be like this. That's all I'm just saying, we made some decisions that had consequences, and when the consequences come, everybody want to look weird, but I'm clear.
So I have a question for you about that. So if, I believe that if engineering got us into this problem, because let's be honest, all the intermediaries that we see, for many, many years, they were necessary. And they worked really well. But now we've evolved beyond that. We don't need those things anymore. I think engineering got us into this problem, and engineering is getting us out. It's inspiring. I really think so. And all of the applications that you're talking about, zero knowledge proofs, voting systems, healthcare records, I mean, that's what I said, that I wished that we talked as an industry more about the potential beyond financialization. I mean, I'm very interested in cryptocurrency as well. Dare I say, invested in it. But I would say that there are so many other applications that the regulators, even the SEC, I mean, we should help them understand it. And if I go back to what I said in the beginning, that this train is moving. The ebbs and flows of financial regulation, of all regulation, you can either get on the train or be run over by it, because the time is coming.
I mean, I just want to say, I know we're pushing on time here, but I just want to say that I think this conversation has been absolutely wonderful. And like hearing different views from people in all different parts of this conversation, I think has helped us. And I just wanted to jump in before. I know we're pushing on time.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I would say, notwithstanding all of the comments from the panelists, which I agree with, it doesn't excuse the hypocrisy of the SEC. So if you say everything's a security and your duty and mandate is to safeguard consumers, you have to have a rational way in which those securities, which are cryptos, are custodied and broker dealers. You have to have real rules. It doesn't excuse the abdication of their responsibility.
Or saying that they have the legal authority and then that they don't.
So let's wrap this up. I just want to ask, there's an election coming up. Crypto has gone in big, and I think, they've got super PACs. Donald Trump said he was going to fire Gary Gensler on day one, and he got a standing ovation. I'm just wondering kind of what you guys think about that. What's the impact going to be, and are we going to see more of this going forward? Is the digital assets industry going to be a powerful political force?
I'll go first since I had the microphone. And I'm from Ohio, so it is semi-swing state, and the chairman of this committee is from Ohio. Last data I have seen from Ohio is there's right around 1.6 million voters who care about Bitcoin or crypto in Ohio, and it's like kind of equally split between R's and D's there. So there is a huge voting block. What crypto has not done, even though there is lots of really great organizations who are pushing for the advancement of a voting block for crypto, we don't know the post-voter file data and whether or not those data really show that there is a monolithic voting block. If the industry can get to that, it's a very powerful voice. So TBD, but I think this election will tell us a lot.
I think the folks in Silicon Valley, which is San Francisco in that area, I just think they aren't good in politics. I think they've repeatedly shown that they're not good. To literally go and say things against one party and your industry that's got to exist in a world with two parties is malfeasance. Like, it's, and real people in business, I'm not gonna say that there's a term of art they call butter the bread on both sides, but there's no reason to insult anybody. Like, that comes from a world that, again, that probably thought saying ICO was good. So literally trying to embarrass or say something bad about any of these folks, if you're really serious about making sure this industry is protected from people doing things to harm it, just doesn't make sense. I think one of the things we fail to do in this industry is that when we talk about the underbanked, we have like tools that really could really help. And if we spent between election cycles really empowering the people who really benefit the most from it, I don't care if they own it or not, they will see our industry as something way better than banks. I mean, Robinhood, it was about robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. Now, I'm not saying I'm robbing anybody, I fit the description, right? I'm not going to get profiled on Capitol Hill today, all right? This is our summit, right? But my point is, I'm not here, like, it's clear that we're here to try to empower folks, but one of the things we've done wrong as a community, again, when we have conferences about underbanked and we're talking about it, we don't bring in the underbanked. We'll get like some old white guy who's a Negroologist who studied underbanked. He's like, I mean, I'm telling you, I've been to the conferences. You literally hear folks that don't look like they missed a meal or missed a bank ever in their life. We're here to help all of it. Like, come on, stop it. Y'all couldn't find nobody. Africa is not on Mars. Like, they even talk about Africa like it's like far away. Like, there's a place called Africa, and there they go. No, listen, if we just get people involved, that really benefit. I'm not talking about the political folks, the regular folks who are looking for real options because banks haven't been kind to us. We really have a perfect foil, but we don't. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do the lobbying. Of course, that's why thank you, Jerron. Okay, you know what I'm saying? But I'm just saying we have a position where we legitimately can tell regular people that we're here to solve a pain point. And please join in on this so the next time your congressperson's talking about what's going to happen, make sure they don't harm us. Because what you're going to be left with are these same big old banks that was redlining you. Like, crypto doesn't have the legacy of the banking industry. So we really got a strong position, but it's literally the same people in charge of this industry now that probably want to be like the big banks.
So that is the reason, just to wrap this up, that is the reason for the Black Blockchain Summit, isn't it?
Right on, right on, right on. Can I get a power fist? Come on, what about power fist? Put that power fist up, y'all. Right on, yes, humbly.
I'm not even going to sum this up because Mary Elizabeth, you did a perfect job. That was my thought too. It's been a terrific conversation, and I really appreciate you guys coming here. And thanks to everybody who came. And open bar.
Yeah, open bar, Brian, and Gary L. Harris, Dr. Gary L. Harris. Right.
Congratulations on your 7th year.
Thank you.
Great conversation.